These convicts saved a guard's life. Welcome back, Charlie here. You might think any inmate would escape at the first chance they get, but when these prison guards were in trouble, their own inmates came to the rescue. In 2015, 17-year-old Jamal Rutledge had been arrested for burglary. He was being booked at the Fort Lauderdale Police Department in Florida, but as Officer Franklin Folks is doing this, he feels a pain in his chest. Before collapsing onto the floor, Jamal goes over to try and help. He immediately starts calling for help, kicking on the metal door to alert the other cops. Other officers soon rush in and perform CPR, thankfully saving Officer Folks' life. Officer Folks had had a potentially lethal heart attack, but thanks to Jamal putting aside the fact the same cop had just arrested him, Officer Folks' life was saved. Fort Lauderdale police later had a ceremony to honor Jamal. Despite this, Jamal did go on to commit more crimes, but hopefully the cops aren't too harsh on him given that he did save one of their lives. In 2016, 6 inmates were sitting in a holding cell in Texas, but that's when the guard outside their cell collapsed. The inmates called for help, but no one came, so they took a big risk, breaking out of their cell to help save the guard. They knew breaking out could have added more time onto their sentences, but they took the risk and helped the unconscious guard. When the inmates broke out, they didn't try to escape. Instead, they launched a rescue mission, with some inmates checking the guard's vitals, while others banged on doors and walls to get more help. 2 cops soon arrive and amazingly the prisoners go back in their cell. The other cops resuscitate the guard, who thankfully survived a very scary heart attack. The guard, Gary Grimm, was moved to tears by the inmates' actions.
If they wished harm for me, all they would have had to do is sit there and do nothing.
The inmates were not punished for leaving their cell, but they also weren't rewarded for saving Gary's life. Personally, I think they should have had their sentences reduced. In 2009, Deputy Ken Moon was sitting alone at his desk at the Orient Road Jail in Florida. That's when suddenly inmate Douglas Burden pounces on him. Douglas locks Deputy Moon in a chokehold, a move that can be potentially deadly, but thankfully 3 other inmates see what's going on. They step in, getting Douglas off Deputy Moon. The inmates restrain Douglas, while another inmate grabs Deputy Moon's radio and calls for backup, all while other inmates try to hold Douglas down. More guards soon arrive and thankfully take Douglas away. Miraculously, Deputy Moon was okay, but I'm sure his life flashed before his eyes that day. In 2017, inmates from the Polk County Jail in Georgia were doing community service in a local cemetery. It was a boiling hot day, causing their guard to start hyperventilating. The guard then collapsed, experiencing a heart attack. This meant the prisoners were unattended outside. They could have easily ran away to freedom, leaving their guard for dead. But amazingly, they didn't. The 6 inmates immediately began helping the guard, removing his vest so he could breathe. They even called an ambulance, who were able to resuscitate the guard.
When that happened, in my opinion, it wasn't about who was in jail, who wouldn't. It was about, a man was going down, we had to help him.
As a thanks for not escaping and saving the guard's life, all 6 inmates had their sentences reduced by a quarter. It really shows that just because these guys are inmates, doesn't mean they don't know right from wrong. In 2013, prison guard Rachel Harris was searching Bobby Ruiz's cell in a jail in Phoenix, Arizona. Rachel told Bobby to wait outside while she searched his cell. But while Rachel was searching the cell, Bobby burst in, biting off part of Rachel's ear. Thankfully, 2 inmates downstairs heard Rachel screaming. They quickly ran into the cell, pulling Bobby off Rachel, and restrained him until other guards detained him. The other inmates were injured themselves while doing this, but their heroic actions likely saved Rachel's life. Unfortunately, Rachel did lose part of her ear. Despite this, she returned to work the next day, and thanked the 2 inmates who saved her in person. For their heroic act, the inmates were given some large pizzas, but I'm sure they would have preferred having their sentences reduced. As for Bobby, he was charged with even more crimes, and had his sentence increased. In 2010, 2 inmates were doing community service in Portland, Oregon. That's when their guard began gasping for air, before collapsing onto the ground. Many inmates would have used this as an opportunity to run away, but not Michael Smith and James Parker. They sprang into action, and soon realized their guard was choking on gum. They pulled the gum out of the guard's mouth mouth, and then started CPR. They then flagged down a car and used the driver's cell phone to call 911. Thankfully, the guard was okay, all thanks to these heroic inmates. In 2016, an inmate at Payne County Jail in Oklahoma asked a prison guard to use the bathroom as he didn't have one in his cell. The guard said yes and opened the inmate's door, but this soon turned out to be a big mistake. The inmate immediately grabs the guard. The guard has no backup. That is until an absolute unit of an inmate steps in. A very big inmate steps in, restraining the attacker. More guards soon arrive, but if it wasn't for this big inmate, this guard could have lost his life. In 2012, Antonio Brown was serving a 5-year sentence at Kent County Jail in Michigan, but on the morning of September 14th, he witnessed another inmate pounce on a female guard. The female guard cried for help, and Antonio bravely came to the rescue, separating the deranged inmate and the guard. For his heroism, Antonio was given a get-out-of-jail-free card in real life, with a judge resentencing him for what he did, meaning Antonio's sentence was reduced from 5 years to 0 days. The crazy thing is, Antonio had only been sentenced a few days before by the very same judge. So while crime doesn't pay, it seems like good deeds do. In 2012, a prison riot occurred at Lee Correctional Institution in South Carolina. 120 inmates rioted. During the riot, a prison guard was attacked and taken captive. This sparked a 5-hour standoff. A SWAT team was called in. The problem was, they had no idea where the inmates were holding the guard hostage. If they intervened, the guard could have lost his life. That was until one inmate did something heroic. He used a contraband cell phone to contact the police. He told them that the inmates were holding the guard in a broom closet. Thanks to the inmate's information, the SWAT team were able to swoop in and free the guard. After this, all of the inmates' contraband phones were confiscated. But in this case, one of those phones literally saved a guard's life. So maybe some contraband isn't so bad after all. In 2016, prison guard Deputy Cuevas was eating lunch at San Quentin Prison in California. That's when he began choking on his steak. He panicked and looked around, but realized no colleagues were nearby to help. To Cuevas' surprise, 3 inmates stepped in to help. One patted him on the back, the other carried out the Heimlich maneuver, and the third called for more guards. Amazingly, the inmates dislodged the steak from Cuevas' airways. After he recovered, Cuevas thanked the inmates for saving his life, and said that the inmates' time behind bars had reformed them. As some of these inmates had ended people's lives, their sentences weren't reduced, but at least now their ratio of taking and saving lives is 1-to-1. Who'd have thought in a prison full of killers, a steak would be the most dangerous thing? But now it's time for you to make your voice heard. Do you think inmates should be released if they save a guard's life? Comment down below. If you want to see my short videos, then check out my second channel. Leave a like if you enjoyed, and if you haven't yet, subscribe. Do it, or you're going to YouTube jail.